The animal and plant kingdom are still in the Garden of Eden. Man, with knowledge of good and evil, once given that knowledge, he understands like the gods, and no longer is innocent and unblameable like an animal. So, man at one point was in his animalistic state, and once he was given the Logos, the Christos, which is the knowledge of good and evil, the serpent in the garden, which awoke in man to the knowledge of good and evil, he was now conscious like the gods. And therefore he was kicked out of the garden. So the self-awareness, the awareness, the consciousness, the, like Jesus says, be wise as a serpent, gentle as a dove. And that is because the wisdom of the serpent, the wisdom of the Kundalini energy must rise to the top. It is suppressed in the lower chakras. And when it is in the lower chakras, it's basically the ego. And when the ego rises to the crown chakra, or the serpent, it is now illuminated and no longer the ego, and that is the alchemical process of transferring lead to gold, the lower energies and the lower nature to the higher nature. So, like when you look outside and you see the trees and you see animals running around, they're still in the Garden of Eden. They're still in heaven within their being because they are not knowledgeable of good and evil, so therefore they are not blamed. Like when you see a bear eat some other creature, you don't blame it and call it evil. You just say that's nature. But when a person does that, it's considered evil, knowledge of good and evil. So therefore we're held to a higher standard because of our consciousness that was given to us. So if we didn't have the Logos, the Christos within, then we would just be like animals roaming the Garden of Eden. And once given knowledge of good and evil, we became like gods. We were self-aware, we were higher conscious beings. And there are certain aspects of the mind that everything must be unified. That's the key. Everything must be unified. You know, the stories of the, of the Garden of Eden are good to understand the metaphysical aspect. Christ was real. I believe he was a real person, 100% a real being. He did probably one of the most profound things in human history because he brought forgiveness. He brought awakening to awaken us out of slumber in a more powerful way than many were able to ever do. And he came with the fullness of God's power within him and offered salvation through truth. And believing in his words, you shall be saved. Don't just idolize him and keep him as a object of righteousness, but to embody what he says, you will have that risen serpent wisdom, and you will have the gentleness and the kindness of a dove. So everything is 100% with Christ, but people just misinterpret it. Modern day religion just butchers and has a very misunderstood and I guess poor understanding of what Christ's message was, and it gets distorted and it turns into legalistic, dogmatic type thinking, which doesn't benefit anybody. If you don't embody love, which God is love, then everything is irrelevant. In 1 Corinthians 13, he says, if you have not love, basically everything else is meaningless. That is the highest force in the universe. The most powerful force in the universe is peace, love, tranquility, true goodness, beingness. So, I just want to say that, yeah, the animals, the plants, they're still in the Garden of Eden. An animal isn't concerned with its identity. It doesn't have an ego. It doesn't care about what you call it, what its name is. It isn't concerned with labels and division. It just functions in nature, and it does what it is genetically programmed to do. Just to exist and to flourish and to live in the garden. But once you have the Logos, you now have access to the higher realms, Jacob's ladder, which is the higher dimensions. Angels going up and down, fallen angels and risen angels. Beings, through wisdom and enlightenment are raising up the ladder to the higher dimensions to return back to God, source, to everything. also the nothing, because he is everything and nothing at the same time, which is beyond comprehension, you know. But that is what you're made of. You know, the logos comes directly from the highest source. So if you operate with the logos, you operate with the highest principle within everything, within existence. So it's a beautiful process. Love, forgiveness, that's what the reason Christ taught love and forgiveness is, because that's a that's the most powerful way to raise your, kundalini energy, to raise your, yourself into your higher mind. And basically when you start in your lowest chakras, you start in your lower mind. And when you start to in, internalize these higher principles, they start to raise you up into your higher mind, and naturally you'll fall back down. A lot of people get discouraged, but the more you practice to stay in your higher mind, it's like riding a bike, and it becomes natural. So that's why in the Bible it says a righteous man falls 7 times, you get up 7 times. You fall 7,000 times, you get up 7,000 times. It's about how many times you endure and maintain. Not the race is to the one who endures. So the more you endure, that's the key. And just trusting within, because love has no fear. And a lot of people have what they believe is love, but everything is fear from what they operate in. So if you're truly in a state of love, you have no fear. You're bold as a lion, but you're gentle, you're loving. So that's just something I want to tell you guys. And yeah, the Garden of Eden is, you look out your door, you're in a garden. There's just structures and buildings upon it. But if you took all the gardens and structures away, you would just be in a big, gigantic garden amongst the animals. And the only thing that separates you is the self-awareness, the knowledge of good and evil. So that's why we must return to a one-mindedness, not a dualistic good-evil type mind. We must have an unconditional mind that isn't based in judgment, but based in oneness. And then you basically eat from the tree of life. You turn from the garden, not the garden, you turn from the tree of good and evil, and you turn to the tree of life. And when you eat from the tree of life, you are basically eternal, because the wisdom is the eternal aspect of God, and the love is the eternal aspect of God, and the love is the wisdom. So, yeah, peace and blessings.